Welcome everyone to this year's annual debate. The topic today is tourism and whether or not tourism is beneficial to local people in developing countries or not. On the proposition side today, we have Professor Seah Jin, and on opposition, we have Dr. Victoria Huang. The first discussion we'll be having is whether or not tourism is beneficial for the environment.
As proposition, I believe that tourism provides an incentive for the government to clean and help the environment. Oftentimes in developing countries, the government does not really care about the sanitary conditions of their own citizens and that is present in their country. And as tourism brings a lot of visitors from around the world, the government now wants to maintain a good reputation from their society. This increases the chances of the government investing the resources to clean and ensure the safety conditions within their society.
What good can tourism actually bring to the environment? First off, pollution. The World Count says that tourism is responsible for 8% of the world's greenhouse gas. And according to Tourmail, tourism generated 4.8 million tons of solid waste that counts as 14% of the total waste around the world. And although we try our best to clean the environmental damage already done is too immense. And the problem is that the locals are the ones that are affected because of such pollutions. And so tourism inevitably comes with deforestation, especially for the developing countries where there is still a substantial area of natural landscape.
Seah Jin, do you truly believe that this incentive would be enough to make a big change, a big noticeable prominent change to the local people?
Well, I do agree that there may not be a direct impact to the local people with the lack of government incentive, but the point here is that it's still better than doing nothing, as the government will be very not incentivized to put any efforts to these areas if there were to be no tourism. The locals also do live in tourist areas, meaning that they still will get affected to a certain extent if there were to be more safety guidelines, or even if there were to be tiny bits of cleaning resources. That's much more better in a comparative world.
It is true that the government being incentivized to help is better than nothing. What do you think about this, Victoria Huang?
It is simply not the fact that tourism will be the only incentive for governments to work for the environment, because there are so many other factors like the actual damage to their people, the social media pressure, the pressure of other countries, and the UN for government efforts. So no, that is not true.
We'll be moving on to the second discussion, which is whether or not tourism is beneficial to a country's culture or not.
As proposition on the topic of culture, tourism grabs the spotlight of numerous individuals around the world, and this provides developing countries with an opportunity to spread their culture and identity. Well, according to Vong, as cited in a journal paper written by Greg Richards from Tilburg University, tourist sites in Macau were able to spread their culture with on-site interpretation. This is a great example as of the influence of tourism in spreading their own culture around the world.
Tourism incorporates culture, obviously, and 1 million people visit different tourist sites that involve the culture aspects of the specific country. And the problem here is that culture is commodified to satisfy the tastes of the tourists. Then not only the authenticity of the culture is lost, but also the culture get out of hand of the locals. Now, then the culture loses its meaning for the locals, creating a stage of authenticity according to a journal article. And for example, a rural village in Botswana, the elders feel a fear of cultural degradation because many tourists do not comply with the restrictions. And also because of the mass influx of tourists, artifacts and architectures are often harmed.
Then what do you think are the long-term effects of cultural commodification on local communities?
Yeah, so the long-term effects of commodification is that as time passes, the culture would not be the culture itself, as it slowly loses its features and becomes similar, as it has to focus on the part that it has to be globalized to be sold to the other tourists. Therefore, people will be spreading misinformation, people would misrepresent the culture, and there will be a total misrepresentation of the culture itself as well.
The third and final discussion that our two participants will be having today is whether or not tourism is beneficial to the economy or not.
When we talk about the economy from tourism, When tourists visit popular destinations, they spend money. This helps local businesses to earn profit as tourists have an incentive to experience authenticity that cannot be replicated in other countries. Literally, if you just use your common sense, it brings money to the country, right? According to a report done on cultural tourism market outlook by Future Market Insights, the global cultural tourism revenue is calculated to be around 5,900 million US dollars, which is a lot. But how does this directly benefit the locals even more? There are things called entrance fees or allocation of resources that can directly give profit to these locals. For instance, according to the Governors Camp website, the Maasai community in Kenya welcomes guests to experience the unique cultures of the area. Here, the revenue from the entrance fee of tourists support 98 vulnerable families consisting of more than 300 individuals. This is a perfect case study and an example as to how these local people are directly impacted by the profit that they can make out of these tourists at the end of the day.
Then why do you believe that tourists would wish to go to small, unknown local businesses over large corporations who are trustworthy and have already been well known for years, maybe even decades?
I personally think that that's a pretty easy question to answer to, because oftentimes tourists make the choice of coming to a certain area and they usually do research where they think about why they want to come to this certain area that they chose, right? And when this is the case, they usually want to experience a unique things or cultures that you can explicitly get from certain areas that you cannot replicate from from your home country or other countries that you may travel to. So it's a very likely chance of these tourists going to local communities over going to McDonald's or Burger King when you can literally get them in the States or anywhere that you maybe have come from.
Okay, so tourism on economy does not bring revenues, but instead it brings inflation to the whole world. Tourists demand goods and services, and the more tourists, the more demand, and an increased demand leads to higher prices, basically inflation. The problem is that at the end of the day, the general people are affected by this because they earn the same general wage, but the expenditure rises and their operational costs will increase, and also for the store people, their margin will decrease as well, so it will strain them a lot.
Do you believe that the issue of inflation is crucial enough to name tourism as a whole as a bad thing? Because inflation can happen for many reasons, not just because of tourism.
Okay, so to answer your question, I'll show you some examples. So research shows that in Malaysia, if tourist arrival rises by 1%, then the inflation surges up by 3.5% proportionally. This is similar or even worse in other countries as well.
So because inflation is already a big issue, we have to diminish at least tourism to mitigate the effects.
Thank you everyone for watching this year's annual debate on tourism.